Hello and welcome to this presentation for Theme 1 of A-Level Business. This one is on 1.1.2 Market Research, and it's going to focus on qualitative and quantitative data and the use of ICT in market research. By the end of the presentation, you need to be able to analyse the relative benefits of using quantitative versus qualitative research and the data that these methods generate. And you need to give examples of how ICT can be used to support market research. So let's take a look at quantitative research first. This type of research involves collecting data that can be analysed numerically. You can calculate percentages. 36% of people said that they loved the new product, or that you can represent in chart format, that kind of data. So it asks closed questions that often start with question starters like how many, how often, who, so that you get very clear, concise answers that you can analyse numerically. Typically, quantitative research is based on large samples. You can get 1,000 people to fill in a questionnaire and analyse the data quite easily. And for that reason, it's more statistically valid. Remember, we talked about sample sizes in the last presentation. Well, quantitative research would involve a larger sample, and therefore the results should be more representative of the whole population than research that involves a small sample size. The main methods of obtaining quantitative data are the various forms of survey: telephone survey, postal survey, face-to-face and online. So that is in contrast to qualitative research. Qualitative research is based on collecting people's opinions, their attitudes, trying to find out what their beliefs are and their intentions. So it's really a lot more detailed. In qualitative research, researchers will be asking questions such as, why do you like this product? Would you do this? Or how would you do this? They're quite open questions, and the reason why they're quite open is because the researchers are aiming to understand why consumers behave in a certain way, or how they might respond to a new product or service. So it's detailed information. Focus groups and interviews, as well as consumer panels, are common methods that businesses use to collect this in-depth qualitative data on consumers' opinions. So let's talk about quantitative research. What are the advantages? Well, one of the advantages is that we can summarise the data very concisely. We can use facts and figures. We can present it as charts that are easy to digest. And that means that we can easily take meaning from them, and we can compare findings more easily. 70% of people liked one product, whereas only 20% of people liked the other product. In addition, when we get numerical data over the long run, we can start to see trends emerging, and that can be very useful for forward planning. However, one of the problems is that it only actually tells us what consumers do, not why they do it. It's not in-depth enough to answer the why question. And remember, although I said it's usually more statistically valid, that's only true if the sample size is big enough and it's been well constructed to reflect the market segments that are being targeted. That basically means, have you asked who you intended to collect the opinions of? So, okay, let's move on and talk about the pros and cons of qualitative research. So, one good thing about qualitative research is it enables businesses to understand how customers think, which they can't find out through quantitative research. We can get detailed opinions on why consumers feel as they do, and that can be really useful in helping to build the brand and helping to promote effectively. And sometimes, by asking quite open questions, the business can get information from consumers that they hadn't actually thought to ask about. So it can be a more creative process. But the trouble is, it is often very small scale. You might have 7 or 8 people in a focus group, for instance. So for that reason, it may be statistically invalid because you might have a biased or skewed sample. It might not represent the views of the whole population. The other drawback is it's very expensive to collect, because hosting focus groups or consumer panels, carrying out interviews, is very labor intensive. You have to use qualified market researchers, and those aren't cheap to use. The other difficult thing is it's hard to collate it and represent it in a form that's easy to digest and to communicate to other managers within the organisation. So what you should be able to do following this presentation is analyse the relative benefits of quantitative versus qualitative research. Hopefully you'd be able to write an answer now comparing the pros and cons of these two types of data. Now we're going to have a look at how ICT can be used to support market research. Well, businesses can use their website to collect market research, for instance by asking users to complete online surveys when they're on the website. Businesses can also analyse consumer behaviour when they're on the website, such as monitoring data on how often consumers visit the website, what time they visit it at, what they click on, whether they actually make a purchase, etc. All of that information can be collected through a business's website. The other thing that businesses can do is get feedback via online reviews. Consumers often leave feedback like this that you can see here on the screen, and that's an important tool for businesses because they can analyse it and make improvements based on the feedback. But it can also be a promotional tool for businesses. Consumers often read reviews when they're deciding whether or not to buy a purchase, and they often trust the views of other consumers more than those of the business itself, because obviously those leaving reviews, they don't have any agenda, unlike the business when it's producing promotional material. Businesses can use data collected via social networking sites. For instance, Facebook gathers data on its users, and that can be really helpful to retailers, such as personal data on age, gender, but also data on where consumers shop and what they buy. Specialist businesses, such as Hootsuite, can actually be used to carry out market research on behalf of businesses. They can give businesses an insight into how their product or brand is being talked about on social media. For instance, bread and coffee were mentioned together 31 times on Twitter between the 25th of March and the 30th of May, as this report here shows. 31 times bread and coffee were mentioned together on Twitter. So that's the kind of information that companies that are specialist companies that analyze social media would be able to tell you. We can also see that 59% of the mentions were actually by males, whereas only 41% of the mentions of bread together with coffee were actually by women. So you can get amazing insight into consumer behavior by analysing social media responses. It's a huge amount of data, and it can be very difficult to organise, but you can use professional organisations to do it and to give you that insight, obviously at a price. Okay, let's take a look at another way that you can use IT to help with market research. Businesses can use databases. I think you know what a database is, but if you don't, it's basically a digital filing system. So there's lots of data on consumers filed in the database, and businesses can actually mine that data, get useful information from it. Tesco's is a good example of a business that collects huge amounts of data through its club card, and because this information is stored digitally, it's a very useful source of secondary market research data. Huge data sets can be analysed quickly and easily, and you don't need to sample. You've got a huge amount of data on almost every customer that shops there, so there's a very low risk of bias when you're collecting data from a source like the Tesco Club Card. It's easy for businesses to identify patterns by comparing purchase data, what you buy, which is recorded with your club card, and their profile of you. what's your gender, what's your age, what area do you live in. They can work out your income group from what you spend and the types of things that you buy. So they can identify trends easily by analysing that data. Many businesses don't have the facility to collect that level of data like Tesco can with the club card. But businesses that can't collect it themselves can buy it in from specialists. So here's an example of a business that you can look into yourself called dunnhumby. So dunnhumby is actually a company that carries out research into consumer behaviour and sells it on to businesses that need it. It's a very, very important way of collecting market research for businesses nowadays. Okay, so what you need to be able to do are those things on the screen. Hopefully you have got a bit of insight into those things now. As always, write any questions down that you might have to clarify anything when you come to class, and we'll see you then. Thank you very much.